Dustin Baker, VikesNow. I am joined by Lindsey Young. Hi, Lindsay. How are you?
I'm good. How are you, Dustin? Thanks for
I'm.
having me on.
Oh, it's a pleasure. I'm doing marvelous. So, in the off chance the viewers of VikesNow aren't familiar with your biography, can you give us a little bit of that, please?
Yeah, absolutely. So I am a writer and assistant editor with the Vikings, and I've been with this position or in this position since December 2015, which is crazy when I think about it, like how many seasons I've already been through. Sometimes it feels like forever, and sometimes it feels like I just started, but absolutely love my job. I know that's cliche to say, but it really is a dream job. I grew up born and raised in Minnesota, so I grew up watching the Vikings. I really fell in love with Minnesota sports, particularly the Vikings and the Timberwolves when I was young, because my dad really loved watching those sports. And it was kind of my opportunity to have that one-on-one time. I had a younger sister as well who wasn't as interested in sitting down and watching the games. And so kind of that one-on-one time with my dad developed into like a true passion and interest for the game. And so I can remember like going to training camps and stuff in Mankato with my dad and saying, I'd love to be a writer about the like for this team someday. And it's kind of one of those things where you talk about as a kid and it's fun, but I still have to, sometimes it's still kind of surreal that I was able to get a job not only in the field that I wanted, but for a team that I grew up watching. So I definitely don't take that for granted and really love engaging with fans and anybody who connects with me. It's just been super fun.
Well, based on that answer, I'm going to mandate my daughter watches this because
Yes.
I want her to follow suit. So, all right, let's talk about some of these Vikings questions. I've got about 6 for you, and for our viewers, I want them to know that Lindsay works for the team. So she kind of has to be a little diplomatic at times, where Ben Lieber or Wes Johnson, can just shoot from the hip. So I did speak with Ben Lieber the other day, and he has a theory that surprised me a little bit, but it's not too outlandish. He theorizes that perhaps an off-ball linebacker, like a man behind Jordan Hicks or Eric Kendricks, could be selected higher than most folks think. Do you tend to agree with that from at least an opinion perspective?
I guess it depends what his definition of higher than most folks think. Like I personally don't anticipate that being like a first round move. Although when I was looking through various mock drafts and stuff, I did see that Chad Reuter from NFL.com, he actually proposed that the Vikings might trade back. I think he said with the Steelers back to number 20. And if they did that, they could take someone like Utah linebacker Devin Lloyd, who could possibly be a good fit. I personally am not, again, personally not really expecting to see that in the first round, but I feel like you never know as well. You never know who's going to be on the board. And with, new defensive coordinator Ed Donatel talking about how we're going to be using multiple fronts, but definitely implementing a 3-4 defense, which the Vikings have not done in years and years. It's hard to know who they might want to bring in or who they might want to add to bolster that linebackers group. Obviously, I think that Jordan Hicks was kind of an underrated signing. I think that he's going to really add a ton to the team, both off the field and on the field. So not sure what to expect. I feel like you can't rule anything out when the draft comes around, but I would say I could maybe see them going with a linebacker on day 2 or 3. Not sure about the first night.
Okay. Yeah, I did a show about 2 weeks ago on the most impactful free agent signings to date. And that's my opinion on Jordan Hicks, because the guy doesn't come off the field. So
right.
with Za'Darius, there's a little bit of injury history. With Hicks, there's not. The guy is always on the field. So I told fans to get familiar with him because, he's going to be out there. And then with Lieber, you start to think about, why is he saying that? Well, the guy, for God's sakes, was an off-ball linebacker. So there might be a little hometown bias, which you would expect and, support.
Really?
On the topic of the draft. Now, I know you can't name names, but give me some maybe a forecast of what you expect for the Vikings with the first pick, or if they would even explore a trade out of it, or what do you got?
Yeah, I think I think before we hit free agency, right, I was sort of thinking probably defensive player, maybe cornerback or edge rusher. I feel like both of those position groups have a lot of great names in this draft, but then when we hit free agency, we were able to retain Danielle Hunter, which is awesome. Bringing in Zadarius Smith, I think, is going to be huge. I just think like the two of them are going to be incredible. So now, like, I'm no longer thinking, I know some experts had maybe mocked like Jermaine Johnson or something to us in the first round. Now I'm not sure that you go that route, just because of what we did in free agency. But again, we'll have to see. I know, just personally speaking, Derek Stingley Jr. is someone who sort of intrigues me as far as a cornerback goes. I think he partially just intrigues me because he played at LSU with Justin Jefferson. And so I kind of like that idea of like a school connection. But, some people think he'll be off the board much earlier. Some people think he'll still be there. People have talked about Sauce Gardner, as a cornerback option, or Trent McDuffie. I think Trent McDuffie is kind of intriguing from Washington, and I'm curious if he might stay on the board a little bit longer. So honestly, the biggest thing that I'm excited to see is not even necessarily which position, but I'm excited to see if the Vikings stay at 12, if they trade back, if they trade up. Draft is always so fun because I feel like no matter how many conversations you have, how many like experts you talk to or listen to, it's nearly impossible to predict like who's going to come off the board after maybe the first 1 to 3 guys. So I'm excited to see, but I would expect probably a defensive player there.
Okay. Yeah. And I'm excited too, because we get to peek into Kwesi's soul. We kind of knew for 16 years, not that Spielman was predictable, but you knew what he liked to do. And I write for VikingsTerritory.com. When I start to think about what could happen in the draft, I'm like, I have no idea, because the guy doesn't have a documented boss man track record. So that's why it adds intrigue to the draft. I agree in that sense that they're always so fun. And then plus the Raiders aren't ahead of the Vikings this year, so they won't muddy up the waters, which tends to happen.
Right.
All right. So you cover the team internally. Can you opine on perhaps the vibe or the energy in the building since the hires of Kwesi Adofo-Mensah and Kevin O'Connell?
Yeah, I feel like there is a lot of energy and excitement around those two. Like I was fortunate to be at the introductory press conference for Kwesi Adofo-Mensah, and just listening to him speak and kind of seeing the energy that he personally brought. Obviously the excitement that the Wilfs had about him as a GM and about what he brings to the team, I think was really kind of exciting to see and to feel. And I just think that whenever there is kind of like you said, these guys don't have a track record. Mm-hmm. And so that's really intriguing. I think people are excited about that. They're excited to see what they'll do, what they'll bring, what kind of, I guess, legacy they'll establish here in Minnesota. I was out of town, unfortunately, when Coach O'Connell did his introductory press conference. So I wasn't able to be in the room there for that. But you listen to players talk the past couple of days during their media availabilities, and most of the players that spoke have been, here for several years. Most of them are veterans and have been through different coaching changes. And they just expressed a lot of excitement about the culture and the kind of energy and mindset that Kwesi and Coach O'Connell bring to the team. And I think too, when you listen to both of them talk, they both really emphasize culture, which is a big thing for them, and being very intentional about the type of people that are in the organization, whether it's coaching staff or on the team. But then also the word that really stuck out to me, aside from culture, is just this idea of collaboration. And I think the two of them, at least based on what they say, are very much on the same page with a vision for this team. And so I think that in and of itself, tends to excite people, because you see, a GM and a head coach who are young, who don't really have this proven track record, but they're excited, they've got ideas. And so I think, it's impossible to not have kind of a buzz of energy around that. And I definitely feel it.
Yeah, it kind of unsurprisingly reminds me of John Lynch and Kyle Shanahan. And ultimately that's where Kwesi came from. And I'm friends with a lot of 49ers faithful, and it's always 1A and 1B when they're talking about Lynch and Shanahan. So I'm hoping that's the collaboration that you speak of. All right. So when Mike Zimmer and Rick Spielman left in January, there was kind of a sentiment that this would be a perfect time for the Vikings to rebuild. In my opinion, the Vikings have never really embraced rebuilding as an organizational philosophy. So some folks thought, this is a done deal. The young guys are coming in collaboration. We're going to get all new stuff. Alas, that didn't really happen. The ownership restated that we're going to be ultra competitive. So I'd like to ask you, do the Vikings consider themselves true blue Super Bowl contenders at this point? Or would 9-8 be considered a good season for O'Connell in his first year?
I think that's a great question. And it's so true. Like you mentioned, just sort of the idea among fans and even, some experts and stuff that this would be a rebuild year. I have such a love-hate relationship with Twitter. Like it's awesome. But then people too, like get into these like huge debates. And I'm not a person who enjoys like a lot of conflict and controversy. So I'm like, guys, let's just wait and see how it plays out. But no, I think, the Wilfs were pretty outspoken. Just to go ahead and I guess reference what they said. They were very emphatic about the fact that there are some pieces here we want to tweak or add. Obviously, bringing in a new GM and a new head coach was part of their plan, but they're not viewing this as a rebuild. And I think you can see that with the moves that have been made with the roster. This isn't a tear down, this isn't a tear down situation. They very much view the Vikings as contenders going into this next season. And I think that's fair. When you look at what's been done with the roster, there have been, a few departures. There's been some additions. I think there's been more change on the defensive side of the ball and more consistency on offense. But I think it just goes to show that, like, hey, no, there's faith in this team, that we have the pieces here that we need. There's a lot of talent on this team. Let's tweak a few things. Let's maybe, change something up here or there, and let's go for it. So I don't think that they're viewing a 500 season as the goal here. I think they're really looking to be a serious contender in 2022. And, that I think adds to the excitement that we were just talking about too.
Yeah. And it feels that way, that the ownership didn't have any beef with the players that were on the roster, because it's basically the same guys with some enhancements like Za'Darius, who you talked about 5 or so minutes ago. So the salary cap right now, free agency is kind of in the rear view. We've got the full tunnel vision for the draft, rightfully so. The Vikings do have some cap space, but they have to reserve some of it to sign practice squad men and the draft class. Do you foresee, though, because there are some good free agents still on the market, do you foresee them possibly making another big name signing?
That is such a tough question. And I'm really not sure. I feel like, the players that you're talking about that are sort of floating out there are big names, like you said, whether they're positions that the Vikings need or other teams need. It's kind of like, wow, like so-and-so hasn't been signed yet, or, I can't believe this person's still out there. And I kind of feel like with teams getting this close to the draft, that maybe you see the draft play out, you sign the guys that you're able to get out of the draft, and then sort of reassess. Like you mentioned with cap space and whatnot, like you have to reserve some of that to sign the new players that you draft. And so personally, I feel like it would be more of a situation to see how the draft goes. Maybe there's a move or two after that, but I think that, we really had kind of the first and the second wave of free agency. And I feel like those are probably the big moves that you see from the Vikings. But again, I guess like the fun thing with the NFL is that anything can happen. I just think with the draft coming up so quickly, all eyes are sort of on that right now.
Indeed. I think the sentiment among fans would be, JC Tretter's out there is one of the best pass blocking centers in the world, and nobody's signing him. So, let's do it. And, he wouldn't be cheap, but there's always kind of mentality that money can be wiggled around, but we shall see on that. The final question I have for you from your boots on the ground perspective. Now, I don't expect your answer to be controversial, but if you could predict one surprising or eyebrow raising occurrence by the Vikings in this draft, could you hint at what that might be?
So I was thinking about this question, Dustin. I don't know if this is just because of my experience writing about the Vikings draft the past 6 or 7 years. I'm really bad at math, but it's been around, that number. I write for a reason. But every year there is so much trading up and down, and especially on day 3 there have been a ton of moves. With Rick Spielman, we knew that he liked to accumulate picks, and he really liked to look for kind of those value guys. And I guess my puppy is seeing something outside, but I guess my hot take, if you will, would be that the Vikings just kind of stay put on day 3 with their picks there and see what they can get, and don't do a lot of moving around. Again, maybe it's wishful thinking as a writer that there won't be a lot of scrambling, but I'll go with that for my answer.
Okay, so we don't get to do the Twitter jokes about stockpiling 6th and
Right.
7th rounders. What am I gonna do on those days? Okay, fair enough.
I know.
All right. Any closing arguments? Any final thoughts for our viewers?
I don't think so. I will give kind of a shameless plug just to keep an eye on Vikings.com. Like you mentioned, Dustin, I mean, there's so many people that you can follow that cover the Vikings from different perspectives and different platforms. Craig Peters and Eric Smith and I will obviously be covering from inside the organization and have some unique content and things to watch for both leading up to the draft and also when we start bringing in new players. So definitely keep an eye. If people aren't following me on Twitter, I'd love to connect. And I always like chatting with fans, especially around this time of the year. So I think that's it, but I really appreciate you having me on. And this was a fun conversation.
Well, it's likewise too. And if you go follow her on Twitter, no big debates. We don't want those. We don't want any name calling, no big debate, no trolling. So.
I don't like conflict. I don't really get into debates. Like every once in a while I do, and then I immediately regret it. Yeah.
Leave that to me. All right, that's all we got. I will be back tomorrow with some sort of solo project, and then I have Nick Olson on Friday. But that is it for Wednesday, and Skol.